Tonight I'll be reading an excerpt from a novel called Perfect World. Just some bare bones context. My protagonist's name is Dale. He is the assistant manager of a sporting goods store. Some would call Dale a loser, but he's working on it. And to that end, he has lately decided to volunteer his time as a literacy tutor in his neighborhood. So we'll pick it up there. The community center was walking distance from his apartment, part of the reason he'd chosen it to begin with. He wondered if this was perhaps an indictment of the seriousness of his putative commitment. Instead of scouring the city, seeking out the organization with the most pressing needs, the most severe deficiencies and demands, he put himself first. Calculated the value of his own time and the fiscal resources he might need to expend. Would he have to take the bus? The subway? A cab when he was running late? Somewhere in his mind twitched a statistic about not joining a health club more than 3 miles from your residence. For beyond that point, well, you were fucked, weren't you? Fucked and fat and out the monthly fee. This was no different. And really, if Dale was worried about the proximity of the center, wasn't that ultimately a show of maturity and in fact a noble concern on his part? A demonstration not of his monumental laziness and self-absorption, but rather of the commitment and caring he had toward his future students. For he wanted to be there for them, to alter their spheres of being, to be hoisted one evening upon their grateful shoulders as they celebrated their hard-won mastery of the subjunctive or parallel construction, or possibly just not using double negatives so goddamn much, and paraded down the bustling streets as hordes of passers-by, otherwise hardened by city life, broke from their cycles of cynicism and self-loathing and looked with appreciation and wonder and a kind of tough, grudging love toward Dale, toward the palpable oval of light pulsing from his admittedly plump form. These awestruck onlookers moved to action, to stepping out of their respective loathsome routines of waking early each morning to rush off to obligations they resented having, and of fulfilling these abhorrent responsibilities in the company of people they often despised. This distaste festering inevitably into a contempt for oneself and, by association, one's own social circle, until Dale, chubby little Dale, through this small act of reaching out, of offering a little something of himself, became the root cause of their liberation. He would be their champion, their icon, their lucky star. It was very probably wrong of Dale to contemplate the possibility of dozens or possibly even hundreds of gorgeous young women lying splay-legged in hammocks, languidly masturbating to photographs of him that they had meticulously clipped from gossip rags and glossy monthly magazines. Of course it was wrong. He was only joking about that. He wasn't in this thing to get laid. But was it so wrong, he wondered, to respond if tapped on the shoulder, introduced to a fetching stranger and asked what one had been up to lately? Well, actually, I've been doing a bit of volunteer work. Was that impulse ultimately so rotten and selfish and contrary to the entire notion of altruism that it just totally deflated the gesture, invalidated it, made it somehow even worse than just doing nothing? Dale wondered about this. He wondered and worried and tried to make up his mind. Some sort of moral gauge was needed, where on one side, you could stack the good achieved by helping someone who needed help, and it was impossible to overstate how much good this could do. As a result of Dale's gesture, for instance, it was possible that his pupil could improve his self-esteem, which could lead to him drinking less and not slapping around his wife with quite as much regularity or vigor, which in turn could lead the wife to curtail the Monday morning prostate play with Mr. FedEx. You could see how the whole thing would go, just like dominoes. But wait a minute, Dale thought. What does it say about me if I'm equating a lack of reading prowess, the lack of a fancy education, or the inability to understand the slippery usage rules of lie and lay, with a propensity toward domestic violence? What kind of sociopathic douchebag would make that association? Do I even deserve to be in the same room with somebody who's taking the initiative to improve himself? To dedicate his free time to something frustrating and difficult? When all I would be thinking is, I hope this crazy motherfucker doesn't pull out a blade? Or try to carjack me after the session? Especially considering I walked here? More shameful still, if possible, was what lurked on the other side of the scale. The ostensibly negative weight, i.e., Dale's perversion of an act that was supposed to be about helping others, leveraging the gesture to meld himself into the sort of more than meets the eye guy women were always cooing about after Pilates class. Oh, so what if Dale has a big forehead, Marcy, or isn't really very tall, and basically crapped away his future to work in a sporting goods store? He's kind, he helps people, he nurtures. Dale shook his head. No, not like that. If I can do this the right way, if I can keep my mouth shut and let the work be its own reward, then fine, all right. But the moment he mentioned it to somebody else, he would have to stop. Unless, he considered, this hypothetical other person mentioned that they were doing volunteer work first, in which case Dale would merely be hitting back the ball, which was fine. Obviously that was fine, right?
I decided to read an excerpt from the novel I'm working on because I'm working on it while I'm here. It's called 2 a.m. at the Cat's Pajamas, and it's about jazz musicians in Philadelphia. It follows 3 narratives: a star-crossed couple, a little girl jazz singing prodigy, and the owner of the Cat's Pajamas. All 3 narratives collide at 2 a.m. at the Cat's Pajamas. The one I'd like to read for you tonight is from the narrative of Madeline, the little girl jazz singing prodigy, whose mother has recently died. Madeline does the shimmy. In the mirror so she can inspect herself, mouth drawn into a concerned shape, Madeline does the shimmy. Shoulders, shoulders, shoulders. It is the world's most serious shimmy. After 60 seconds, a timer in the shape of a flamingo tremors and trills on plastic legs. She stops and rejoins a cigarette in an ashtray on her vanity. Again, she says. Madeline restarts the shimmy. On the record player, Blossom Dearie sings, "Can I Come In?" Shoulders, shoulders, shoulders. Madeline pretends there are cymbals and bells on her hips and shoulders she wants to make clang. After 60 seconds, the timer trills. Terrible, she says to herself. On a list by the ashtray, she marks 5 minutes next to the shimmy. The other categories, singing, scales, guitar, are empty. She takes a long pull from the cigarette and frowns at herself in the mirror. She wears a clothespin on her nose and the uniform for St. Anthony's, a maroon sweater over a gray jumper over a gold shirt with stitching the color of a lemon. Thick maroon tights. It is dark, dark 7 a.m. on Christmas Eve. Madeline is 2 days away from being 10. She spent the previous night dreaming of apples. She thinks the occasional glimmers she can see through her window are flurries. She has an unignorable nose and trouble spelling the word rhythm. She is allergic to nothing. She needs a haircut. She smokes Newport menthols from the pack her mother was halfway through when she died. She only has 10 more minutes to practice before the walk to school. Like a comic, a horrific afterthought, a roach darts down the wall, its path following indecipherable logic. Madeline screams in high C and stamps out the cigarette. She recovers, performs a pivot turn while ripping a sheet from a roll of paper towels on her nightstand. The roach halts, teasing coordinates out of the air with its antennae. Paper toweled, her hand hovers over the roach long enough for the bug to become paralyzed by options. Madeline closes her eyes, makes the sound of a train on the prairie asserting itself at dawn, and squeezes. South Philly roaches are full and round, like tomatoes. This one leaves a mark on the wall, but most of it gets flushed down the toilet. Then she washes her hands. Changes the record, removes the clothespin from her nose, places the needle onto the record, stares at herself in the mirror until the music starts. Madeline sings. My name is again. My name is Blossom again, she says. My name is Blossom, I was raised again. My name is Blossom, I was raised in a lion's den. My name is Blossom, I was raised in a lion's den. My nightly occupation is stealing other women's men. Now don't you ooh, scooty-a-doo, and I won't yet you do-do-do-do. So don't you ooh, scooty-a-dee, and I won't yet you do-do-do-do. Now don't you ooh, scooty-a-dee, and I won't yet you do-do-do-do. Madeline sings with one hand on her hip, the other hand swinging back and forth like a metronome by her side. Tucked into the mirror of her vanity, a picture of her mother, singing, one hand on her hip, the other swinging back and forth like a metronome by her side. The song is over. Madeline marks Blossom's Blues next to singing. The scatting was flat, but she hit all the right notes. B-, she writes. The flamingo timer squawks. It is time to leave for school. She pokes her nose through the curtains and confirms that the glimmers are flurries, lighting up her courtyard in the thickening dawn. The ground looks wet. With mittens, scarf, boots, hat, and umbrella, Madeline turns herself into a warm, dry house. Through the courtyard, whose fountain has given into time and inattention, past the store of stained glass lamps, a line of dancers, their jeweled heads bowed, through a cobbled and unforgiving alley, Madalena's house marches past the blue carousel horse in front of Santiago's, its flourish of hooves paused forever in mid-gallop, back down another mad alley, through the backyards of the cheese store, cloths, earth smells, the fish stop, boxes on boxes stacked on boxes, the sweet store, nothing at all, counts, the Red Lion diner, a worker peels a potato on a crate, through another alley until she arrives at the immortal realization of St. Anthony's of the Immaculate Heart. St. Anthony's has a stained glass window and a schoolyard the size of a football field. The field is in the shape of an hourglass. On the top half, what time you have left, grades K to 4 play double dutch and hopscotch. On the bottom half, what time you have lost, grades 5 to 8 hang in slack-jawed clots, digging fingernails into their burgeoning pimples. The middle belt section acts as a repose for teachers who hand off whistles, balls, warnings, and gossip before diving back into one side or the other. Stacks of row homes, each bearing 5 families, hover at the bottom of the field. Every morning, out of these crowded brick houses emerge the sorriest kids in the world, yawning, pulling themselves into maroon sweaters, screaming at each other to get off, go away, stop doing that, find the cat, feed the cat, tell them to stop doing that to the cat. Shut up, get out, leave it alone, give it back, get off of it, now, I mean now. The entire proposition of the field is carried out in a downward slant so that children going to school, as these children are today, can climb from their cruddy homes with plenty of time and perspective to appreciate the magnitude of church. Check me out, the building says. This is what happens for those who pray. Conversely, at the end of each learning day, the church dispenses the children back to their cruddy homes quick, like gravity. Here's Madeline, on the day of the caramel apples, blending in with these kids as they trudge up the schoolyard to class. She has no friends, not because she contains a tender grace that fourth graders detect and hate, not because she has a natural ability that points her starward, though she does. Madeline has no friends because she's a jerk. This is what she said to Marty Welsh. Quit taking so goddamn long at the pencil sharpener. That his father had yet to return from getting the dry cleaning the week before did not matter to Madeline. An absent father doesn't give you the right to sharpen your pencil for like half an hour. This is what Madeline said to Jill McCormick on the occasion of Jill's umpteenth attempt to befriend her. Your clinginess is embarrassing. Madeline prefers to spend recesses alone, throwing a tennis ball to herself, singing scales under her breath. She makes sad laps up and down the parking lot of St. Anthony. Even the tennis ball is scared of her, unraveling and worrying itself so she has to arc her arm back practically to heaven to elicit a bounce. If she was interested in minions, Madeline would be a bully, but she doesn't like weak people distracting her from her practice. There was a temporary reprieve in her isolation in the weeks following her mother's death. During those weeks, Madeline, polite with shock, allowed Jill McCormick to pal around. It wasn't long, however, before Madeline came to and told the girl to scram. Madeline has only ever had one friend, Emily, a broad-shouldered ice skater who ended up at St. Anthony's as the result of a clerical mistake. Once, Madeline watched her make a series of circles on an ice rink. On solid ground, Emily still walked as if in negotiation with a sliver of silver blade. Her parents moved to Canada so she could live closer to ice, but not before she taught Madeline every curse word she knew. On her last day, in the bathroom of St. Anthony's, her voice reverent and holy: shit, fuck, cunt, piss, motherfucker, bitch. Madeline uses these words when one of her classmates tries to get close now, as in, get your stupid piss cunt out of my creamy fucking goddamned way. The snow, finished, has exhausted itself around the field in piles and has made everything cold. The moral of the story is, even jerks have mothers who die.
I'm reading something called Oversoul. It's a section of a short story that I'm still working on, I guess. There's no setup for it. You can lose yourself in increments, this many and that many month stretches at a time. One morning you slug out of a tiny bunk in some building bordered by razor wire in your 20s. Where the fuck are they? A few sets later, half your 30s, vamoosed. Left your sorry self in a nasty communal bathroom, plucking stubborn gray hairs out of your chin while mourning the immutable fact your once superior hairline has begun a full-fledged recession. What's worse is you lost all of this, and what's left to covet is reaching a few days till last wake up. Here's how it goes when you touch down. There's the festivities and visits from people you ain't seen since the last time you were home, or maybe a time or two for a distracted weekend visit during the first few months of your set. How it goes if you come home to a short stash is, if you're lucky, you get kicks from a female or fam or homeboys, the ones that not only say they want to see you back on your feet, but confirm they're beyond fat-mouthing by tossing your impecunious ass a few bucks. Those first few days, weeks, back in the free world, you see all of mankind's progress in the blink of an eye. When you left, we just invented the wheel. But now, we're flying spaceships. Unless you're a sucker square, home sweet home equals an abundance of has-beens, ready to pay homage to your new, but let's keep it real, most times temporary, swollen biceps with a shot of refurbished pussy. But sooner or later, after you inhale those early emancipated breaths, inevitably sooner rather than later, you end up gaping into the maw of the real, live, wide, apathetic, show me what you're gonna do this time cosmos. A position that clarifies options for even the most imbecilic of niggas. Be who you were, be who you thought you could be somebody brand new altogether. Welcome back is what the sign says, and you think this brand new me was popping the fams just came home cherry with today's turnout. My mama, my sis, and baby bro, my twins, my fine woman, all convened on the porch, cheering and carrying on, while I lugged my luggage, a state-issued trash bag, up our rickety front steps. A trillion pats on shoulders built from a consistent season on the pal, plus yet another faithful push and pull-up regimen. So many encouraging words, all I can hear is a hella loud drone. Uncle Sip is in the backyard, stooped over a billowing grill, wielding a long spatula, a semi-empty brew sitting on the side table with the meat. Somebody, no doubt one of my young geek nephews, has rigged our giant home speakers so they reach the patchy, hillocked lawn. There's an old, soulful voice welling across them, so you know one of the grown folks is gangster DJing duties. My oldest aunt two-steps and nods his unkempt salt and pepper natural and keeps right on warbling along to the chorus till he sees me eyeing him from the porch. What it is, nephew, he says. What it is, what it ain't, and what shall it be? Unc, I say, you know. My response, I mean literally. Unc's the only one in the whole fam who's logged more time in the system than me. One of those old heads who, when you're facing new charges, can quote your prospective sentence under the new and old guidelines. He's probably spent most of his adult years on probation, parole, house arrest, judge-ordered community service, mandatory outpatient drug program, city-funded intervention, clean slate, fresh start, second chance, on some form of paper. But Unc's illustrious law-breaking rehab history is another story. Shit, I got more than enough trouble keeping up with my own. The rest of the stage. See fold-up tables scattered around the yard. See the bushes trimmed to neat shapes. See here and there adults and a few sneaky youngsters circumventing potholes with styrofoam cups in hand. See a dominoes game at a shaded corner table with one of my oil-tongued cousins harangue some dudes who don't at all look familiar except they resemble in dress and bearing the old heads who parlay in the neighborhood preaching advice they didn't have the brains to follow themselves. While I preside over the scene, my woman taps my arm and motions me to follow. My word, from the front and back, my baby girl is a champion. But the cool part is, her physicality ain't even the half. Yeah, ask any old head, and he'll warn against bestowing an abundance of faith in a woman, any woman, while you're gone. Which is sage advice for sure, but maybe once in a millennia, you have a shot at finding an extra special one. The kind who'll stay down an entire set, by which I mean will keep a few bucks on your books, pay you consistent visits, and send enough naked flicks to keep your balls from swelling to the size of melons. And if it's true there's something rare about a female who can do that once, imagine how sublime one is that manages any more than that. And peoples, please copy that. Please hold up on the hasty judgments. Yes, it's true. While I was gone, she might have gave away the goods, but it's also equally, if not more true, that my heart couldn't stand an investigation. With the hope that the light of my life is luring me upstairs for a shot of inspired hair, plus a skinny dip in her nexus, the welcome home combo of my star-sprint dreams, I hustle behind her. We end up in the attic, all but insulated from the blare of the rig system and my loudmouth relatives below. Must be my mama that tucked my twin bed with hospital corners, retaped my yellowed hoop posters, lay a towel atop my masticated chest of drawers, that sprinkled the shag carpet with powder. Lovely gestures, but not a one of them negate the fact that a grown-ass man has got no business calling this home. My woman don't so much as flash a tooth when I tell her how much I missed her, when I ask where she was my last week's down. There's no easy way to say this, she says, and lets me drown in the very next moment. And peoples, listen, to hell with what you, them, anyone says. There are times when it pays to be tough as steel. There are times when no matter, we can't fake an armored heart.
And this is an excerpt from a novel called The Preservationist. And all you need to know is the protagonist is Junius Bird, who is a wealthy nonagenarian driven to extend his life as far as it will go. ARMD, armed, is an acronym for Autologous Restoration for Military Deformation. Okay. They traveled in a fleet of black town cars, their lives stuffed into oversized canvas duffel bags. The mountain road soon lost its pavement and the climb steepened. The pine shadows of the lower slopes gave way to hardwood and cottonwood and a myriad of strange plants, nameless in the dilated minds of the 7 young men. The sunlight pale and crystalline as amber. This place didn't seem in the same world as the bomb-eaten structures of Iraq or Afghanistan, the suffocating bunkers, or else it seemed of another time, prehistoric, limestone bluffs printed with the shapes of extinct life, trilobites and mollusks and whole schools of tiny fish. The mansion finally revealed itself around a final tight bend, a grove of hickory that drew to the side like a stage curtain. It was a famous house, they'd been told. It was said it had been relocated from California, piece, by train and truck, by helicopter and cable, a vestige of Hollywood splendor plopped into the wilds. Incredible view, isn't it? Conrad said as he greeted them, the scene chromatized red from the dust stirred by the vehicles. In the westerly distance was the flat white baldness of Knoxville. The ARM program had few but strict stipulations, Conrad explained. It was a 2-year commitment, but they would see results much sooner than that. Lazarus, said the doctor, a grin eating his face, was raised from the dead after 4 days. Conrad's lower half was withered and he wore a high shoe, and the soldiers followed his limp past the mansion where they weren't allowed, through the bright canopy of transplanted coffee trees, which they were not to touch, through the calcium-white corridors of the institute where they were not to wander unsupervised, and they unshouldered their bags in the small rooms of the sleeping quarters, still cloyingly scented with new paint. Max sensed the insecurity beneath the doctor's electrified confidence, little pops and hisses in the current of his talk. Already he was fighting against a strong undercurrent of pessimism. His fellow soldiers seemed blind with optimism and faith in the system. The mansion in the wilderness, the sky churn of the white windmill, the promise of biological reversal. It was a place of curious and troubling compensations, the doctor's shoe squeaking with every pendulum step. Later, the soldiers stood in the corridor of the institute, a group of limb-damaged young men in civilian clothes and outgrown military haircuts, waiting to greet the man, Junius Bird, this prized specimen of hope. Light reflected from the white tiles like paranormal orbs, sounds echoed, folded in on themselves. Everything seemed to have a second life here. The old man, looking light and electric from a blood transfusion, walked toward them in a lustrous blue kimono, a young woman on his elbow, an IV stand gliding behind him. The soldiers whispered, made wagers on his age, wondered if his dick had withered off, debated the ramifications of laboratory-grown genitalia. June stopped, faced the line. He was small, muscled, beautifully manicured, lips an unnatural red, hair white, short as a fuse. The soldiers stiffened into a synchronized salute, and June grew visibly taller, as though inflated with a forgotten power. Several right arms had been damaged, truncated at various points, yet they all saluted with vigor. "Ah, I see," said June. He deepened his voice. "Soldiers!" He repaid the salute with mock sternness. "At ease." Max, hiding near the end of the line, brought his half arm down, gratefully. It was a ghost-like feeling to make that motion and not feel contact on the brow. June went down the line one by one, inspecting, questioning, trying to provoke laughter. Jackets were removed, cuffs rolled up, flesh exposed. There was a compact creatine muscle kid called Stillwell, whose weak chin was partially offset by a cocky military jaw jut, left leg and right foot blown off by a bomb in Yusufaya. There was Brazi, who looked 12 years old and couldn't stop smiling and shouted, "Sure, sir," and "thank you," like he had a kind of inverted Tourette's, arsenaled with niceties, right arm gone up to the shoulder. There were two double arm amputees. Flores, whose language was laced with the Bible in a way that made Max think he'd done some very bad things, and Lozada, who didn't speak much English but knew the words pressure plate and explode, and who blinked wildly as he spoke. Next to Mac was Case, an affable, doughy kid whose left side, leg, arm, ear had been melted away in a Baghdad fuel blast. He kept his glasses on with a black elastic strap. Each injury had a story, and these stories were relayed with such pride so as to seem almost adequate compensations for the lost flesh. Junius Bird walked along the line with a hand spidered on his chest, an insect of profound sympathy. He said, "Oh, I see it. You're here because you all deserve to get back what's been taken away." He spoke in a burnished drawl, an unplaceable, triple distilled accent that suggested lost dialects. Because second chances have to be earned, and you've rightly earned that. Max was the first to really look him in the eye. His arm was tightly bandaged, that hung from the sleeve of his t-shirt like a long cocoon. "What's your name, son?" Max told him. "Can I see?" said June. He unwrapped the dressing. The arm was withered, puckered with sores and lacerations, jeweled with black stitches and small exposures of metal rod. It looked alive with pain. It was the only injury amongst the soldiers that hadn't sealed up in hard, nervous tissue, that smooth seashell pink. "May I ask, how did it happen?" "Same sad story, I suppose. No different than anyone here." June had made a step down the line when Max said, "Let's see you now." June said, "I didn't hear you, son," but it was clear he had. He was smiling a disbelieving smile. "I said, let's see you now. Only fair, sir." The young woman, his granddaughter, his nurse, his what, punched a look into Max's face, and he was stung by the conviction of her eyes, the protective instinct that set her beauty aflame as though it were a kind of natural defense mechanism. June whispered her free from his side and tugged at the knot of his waist belt.